Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today is 3rd May 2025 and today we have some very important articles for the discussion, and one by one we'll try to discuss all these important articles in a very detailed and in-depth manner. And we have covered important articles from both Hindu and Indian Express newspapers, and one by one we'll try to understand these topics in a much more detailed manner. And the first topic with which we are going to start this discussion is about the western disturbances. So we'll understand what are these western disturbances, because yesterday what happened was there was a heavy rainfall in the national capital, and the heavy rainfall is primarily because of the western disturbances. And the western disturbance is a weather phenomenon, a climatic phenomenon that we should understand, right? Because the western disturbances, it actually provide the pre-monsoon rainfall over the northern part of India, and western disturbances also support the wheat crop as well. And in this context, it is very important for us to understand the western disturbances and their impact on the Indian subcontinent, right? So firstly, we'll understand the context. So the context is that the strong western disturbances this year actually triggered a heavy rainfall in the national capital, and this western disturbance has resulted in a huge rainfall or a near flooding situation in Delhi, and it has also resulted in a heavy storms across the national capital. And even not just the national capital but also the northern part of India and even the southern part of India also experienced heavy rainfall. Several regions have experienced severe rainfall because of the western disturbances. So therefore it has caused floods, hail, and even the disruptions in the transportation and mobility sector as well, right? So this is the context, and that's why we're going to discuss the western disturbances as well. And in fact, why the western disturbances are so strong that it has caused heavy rainfall over the several regions in the northern India. And in fact, the recent studies have actually shown that the climate change is actually altering the frequency, intensity, and seasonality of the western disturbances, right? So western disturbances earlier, they were not that severe, they were not that strong. Yes, it is true that they used to cause rainfall, but it is not so strong that it could result in a near flooding situation in the national capital of Delhi. So therefore the climate change is the key factor which has been resulting in the strong western disturbances causing heavy rainfall in several regions in the northern part of India. So climate change has been increasing the frequency, intensity, and even the seasonality of the western disturbances, and overall it has been resulting in the unpredictability of weather in India, right? So earlier we have we have a climate models, we have actually built the climate models. So those climate models are actually based on the western disturbances, so the moderate western disturbances, but the climate change has been making the western disturbances and other important climate phenomena unpredictable, right? So we'll understand briefly what are exactly these western disturbances. So western disturbances, one thing that we need to understand here, so they originate in the Mediterranean Sea. So they originate near or close to the Mediterranean Sea, and they flow eastwards towards the Indian subcontinent. They flow eastwards towards the Indian subcontinent. So western disturbances are eastward moving tropical cyclones, or these are not tropical cyclones. You have to understand the difference between tropical cyclones and the extratropical cyclones. So I'll tell you what is the main difference between tropical cyclones and extratropical cyclones. But western disturbances are the extratropical cyclones. They are extratropical cyclones, but they are not tropical cyclones. We very often observed the tropical cyclones in both Arabian Sea as well as the Bay of Bengal region, but these western disturbances are categorized or considered as the extratropical cyclones. So we'll understand the characteristics of extratropical cyclones as well. But one thing that you should remember here, the western disturbances are extratropical cyclones. They are extratropical cyclones. right? So these extratropical cyclones, they bring rain and also snow over the northern part of India, and they also help rabi crops like wheat, right? So western disturbances bring both rainfall as well as snow, and they also help the rabi crops in the northern part of India such as wheat. And in fact, they originate near the Mediterranean Sea. So this is the region where the western disturbances originate. And apart from that, the Caspian Sea, so this is the Caspian Sea region, and this is the Black Sea area. So from the Black Sea area, Caspian Sea region, and even the Mediterranean Sea area, so these western disturbances originate and they start coming towards the east, towards the Indian subcontinent, right? So while on their journey from the Mediterranean Sea, what they do, they actually pick the moisture, they pick up the moisture, and once they reach the Indian subcontinent, due to the influence of the Himalayas, they start shedding their moisture over the northern part of India or Indian subcontinent. So this is how the western disturbances brings rainfall to the Indian subcontinent. So remember that western disturbances are extratropical cyclones. I am repeating it again, these are the extratropical cyclones. And the other thing that we should remember here, that extratropical cyclones are different from the tropical cyclones, and we will understand the differences between the tropical cyclones as well as extratropical cyclones in this lecture. Now one thing, the other thing that we should understand, how the western disturbances are formed, right? So what exactly triggers the formation of western disturbances over the Mediterranean Sea, Caspian Sea, and also over the Black Sea? In fact, the western disturbances are actually formed by the interactions between the polar and also tropical air masses. So the tropical air masses interact with the polar air masses, and that would result in the formation of the western disturbances. And after this interaction, they travel along the subtropical westerly jet stream over the Himalayas, right? So this is how westerlies flow from the subtropical high region. So from the subtropical high region, so this is how westerlies flow, and that's why they are called as western disturbances, and they originate in the west, particularly over the Mediterranean Sea, and they start flowing towards the eastern side. And in fact, the western disturbances are embedded in high altitude winds, and they are very often accompanied with the low pressure areas as well. So low pressure areas means they also attract a lot of moisture as well. Now we'll briefly understand what exactly is the impact of western disturbances on India, because ultimately once the western disturbances flying all across these different countries, they coming to the Indian subcontinent, and they started shedding the moisture over the much of the Indian subcontinent, and that has been resulting in a significant amount of rainfall over India. And this rainfall due to the western disturbances also helping the rabi crops like wheat. So they are also helping the rabi crops such as wheat. And in fact, since it has been causing the pre-monsoon rainfall in India, we will understand the overall impact of the western disturbances. And apart from that, because of the climate change, the frequency and the intensity of the western disturbances has been increasing, and western disturbances are no longer like before. Western disturbances before, they used to bring moderate pre-monsoon rainfall over the Indian subcontinent, but now the western disturbances are becoming more and more stronger, and that has been resulting in heavy torrential rainfall and even flooding in different parts of India, right? So this is primarily because of climate change. So climate change is the key driving factor here. Now, what are the impacts of western disturbances on India? So we'll try to understand this in a very detailed manner. And we have understood that western disturbances actually bring both rainfall as well as snow over the northern plains, right? So it brings both rainfall and snow over the northern plains during the winters, and it will also help in agriculture, and particularly it will help the rabi crops such as wheat in areas like Haryana, Rajasthan, Punjab, Western UP, in all these areas. So the western disturbances would help a lot for the agriculture or farming sector. And in fact, during April, May, March, so these months generally what happens now, actually this is what is called as the pre-monsoon time. So this is a pre-monsoon time. So at this point of time, so there is intense heat over the northern plains, so intense heating in the northern plains. Because of the intense heating, particularly because of the summers, what generally happens is that there is a heat wave like a condition develops. So we have already understood what are the causes of the heat wave over the Indian subcontinent. So therefore what actually happens now, because of intense summers, there is a probability of development of heat wave over the Indian subcontinent. However, western disturbances would actually help reduce the summer heat intensity, right? So the western disturbances substantially lower down the summer heat intensity, thereby bringing relief to the northern plains. And apart from that, the western disturbances also have the potential of triggering extreme weather. So they also have the potential of triggering the extreme weather events, such as they can cause hailstorms over the northern India, and they can also cause flash floods because of the torrential rainfall, and it would also result in the floods as well. So therefore there is no doubt, because of the climate change, western disturbances intensity and frequency has been substantially increasing. So this increasing frequency and intensity of the western disturbances would be accompanied with hailstorms, flash floods and intense floods in several regions and cities in the northern part of India. And in fact, so it also disrupts the normal life of the people as well, because we have seen that the yesterday's western disturbance led rainfall has resulted in the delays of several flights, road blockages, urban flooding in several cities such as Delhi. So therefore it also causes several disruptions to the normal life of the public, and this is another major aspect. And in fact, it could also alter the monsoon behavior, right? So it could alter the monsoon behavior as well. Monsoon behavior in the sense that, by the end of May, beginning of the June, so the Indian subcontinent, particularly the southern part of India, would start experiencing the southwest monsoon. So would start experiencing the southwest monsoon as well. However, the western disturbances have the potential to impact the monsoon behavior as well, because overlapping of the western disturbances during the pre-monsoon and monsoon months would actually disrupt a crucial rainfall and also disrupt the intensity of the overall rainfall that Indian subcontinent would receive. So these are some impacts of the western disturbances on India. So in this context, so what should be the way forward? So we have understood that western disturbances have both positive impact and negative impact over the Indian subcontinent. So when we talk about the positive impact, it brings rainfall over the northern plains, and it also brings much relief from the summer heat across the northern part of India, and it would also help the agriculture sector by bringing adequate rainfall, and it will help certain crops like wheat. However, the negative aspects, it brings torrential rainfall, flash floods, hailstorms in northern part of India, and it disrupts the normal life of the people, and it also disrupts the monsoon and the distribution of monsoon rainfall over the Indian subcontinent. So therefore it is having both positives and negatives. So therefore, how we could actually be prepared to the vagaries of the climate change. Particularly, climate change has been increasing the intensity and frequency of the western disturbance. So therefore, climate change is a reality and we should be adequately prepared. So what should be the way forward in this context? So first thing, what we can actually do, enhance the weather forecasting and our capabilities of weather forecasting. So that includes strengthening satellite monitoring, radar coverage, and even the artificial intelligence based forecasting to track the weather, the western disturbances more and more precisely and accurately, because we could actually leverage technology. So when we are able to leverage the technology, it will help us, right? So leveraging technology would substantially help us in, right, because it provides us the accurate details with respect to the western disturbances and their intensity. So for that, what we need to do, we need to strengthen the satellite monitoring, we need to strengthen the radar coverage, and even we should deploy artificial intelligence based forecasting to track these western disturbances more accurately and more precisely. And even we have cities like Delhi and several other metropolitan cities as well, and these cities are mostly vulnerable because of the high population density, and in case of floods due to heavy rainfall, there will be a loss of life in Delhi. So in fact, it also damages the infrastructure as well. So therefore, the urban drainage system has to be managed in a much more efficient and comprehensive manner, so that we could be able to deal with such heavy and intense rainfalls caused by either monsoon rainfall or the rainfall caused by the western disturbances as well. And in fact, it is also very, very important that we need to install the early warning systems, and these early warning systems will help us manage waterlogging, and it will also prevent any sort of a transport disruptions that have been taking place. And early warning system will also provide the administration with adequate time to take precautionary measures to deal with the sudden flooding in cities like Delhi. And in fact, as I have already told you, that western disturbances play a very, very important role when it comes to the sowing of wheat over the northern part of India, particularly in some states like Punjab, Haryana, Western UP and Rajasthan. So since intensity and frequency of the western disturbances have been increasing and the time of western disturbances is also changing, it is important that the farmers should modify the sowing patterns. So there is a need to change the sowing patterns of wheat in the northern part of India to align with the timing of the western disturbances. And apart from that, so because of the unpredictable nature of the rainfall caused by the western disturbances, all the farmers should be covered with the crop insurance scheme as well, right? So the crop insurance scheme should be based on western disturbances forecast to protect the rabi crops and the farmers as well. And in fact, so it is also very, very important that we need to boost the interdisciplinary climate modeling. So what does the interdisciplinary climate modeling? So we need to understand the impact and influence of western disturbances on monsoon, on the Indian monsoon, and we should also understand the impact and influence of monsoon over the western disturbance, and we should also understand the weather phenomena, the regional weather phenomena and global weather phenomena and their impact on both western disturbances and the Indian monsoon. And this is what is called as the interdisciplinary climate modeling. So interdisciplinary climate modeling of western disturbances will also help India adopt certain policies, or it will also result in adaptation policies. And apart from that, collaboration between different stakeholders is also very, very important to deal with the increasing intensity and frequency of the western Ghats. So for that, Hindu Kush mountains, Hindu Kush mountains north of Himalayas, these are known as Hindu Kush mountains, and in fact Hindu Kush mountains are also experiencing the melting due to the climate change and other factors. So therefore, engage with all the countries which are part of this Hindu Kush region or Himalayan region to address the transboundary weather impacts because of the changing western disturbances, their intensity, frequency, and also timing. Remember, as I have already told you, that we need to understand the basic difference between what are the cyclones and anticyclones. We very often heard that both in Arabian Sea as well as the Bay of Bengal. So these are the two areas where we very often and frequently see the emergence of the tropical cyclones. And in fact, western disturbances are categorized as the anticyclones. They are known as anticyclones. So what is the difference between cyclones and anticyclones? Now, in fact, when we talk about these cyclones, so cyclones actually have the low pressure system, right? So it is having a low pressure system, and around this low pressure system, so winds would circulate around this low pressure system. So in contrast to the cyclones, anticyclones, there is a high pressure system, right? So there is a high pressure system with surroundings of low pressure. And this is the basic difference between the cyclones and the anticyclones. And in fact, when we talk about the cyclones and the movement of the winds around the low pressure system, so it actually blows anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere. So this is equator, and this is the northern hemisphere, and this is the southern hemisphere. So when we particularly talk about the cyclones in the northern hemisphere, the winds would blow in the anti-clockwise direction in the northern hemisphere and clockwise direction in the southern hemisphere. However, the anticyclones, it is completely different, because for anticyclones, the winds would blow clockwise in the northern hemisphere and vice versa. And apart from that, it blows clockwise in the southern hemisphere and it blows anti-clockwise in the southern hemisphere. So completely different and reverse, and this is very, very important that you should remember here. And apart from that, cyclones are very often associated with a cloudy skies. So you could observe cloudy skies and heavy rainfall with stormy winds. However, anticyclones are associated with a clear skies. So there will be no clouds, a clear sky, mild winds, and also the dry conditions which are existing, and it can actually cause a great damage to lives and property. Tropical cyclones, we knew that how tropical cyclones are more and more destructive. There are number of tropical cyclones that India has been experienced so far, and we also know that how destructive they are actually. However, the weather is settled and pleasant when it comes to the anticyclones. So this is the basic difference between the cyclones and the anticyclones. However, this is also important that this could be asked in your prelims examination and mains examination as well, right? So kindly go through this, and if you have any doubts regarding the cyclones and anticyclones and even the western disturbances, so please type your doubts in the comment section, and we'll try to address those doubts as well. And the next important topic is strengthening parliamentary oversight in India. So in India, we have a parliamentary form of government. Parliament holds the executive accountable, and we don't have the complete separation of the legislature and the executive that is being observed in the US. However, we have a parliamentary form of government, and in the parliamentary form of government, executive is responsible to the legislature, and legislature can also hold the executive accountable through various tools. Now, in this context, this article has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this is very important for your general studies paper 2, particularly for the mains examination. And the context is that, so we all knew that India has adopted the parliamentary form of government, or we have a parliamentary system. And this parliamentary system has been provided by the constitutional makers to ensure that the executive, which is elected by the people, is accountable to the legislature. However, The recent trends, if you could carefully observe the recent trends in parliament, particularly the number of sittings, the number of bills passed in the parliament, and even the number of bills which are referred to the committees in the parliament, and passage of the private member bills, all these things, if you can carefully look into the functioning of the parliament, it generally appears that parliament's oversight role has been weakening day by day, right? So this is the context, because in the Indian parliamentary system, so disruptions and underutilized committees and absence of post legislative review, so all these different mechanisms are started eroding, or they are not at all available, and these things have been diluting the parliament's role as the guardian of the public interest, and that's why this article has been specifically given here. And what is parliamentary oversight? So we'll try to briefly understand what exactly is a parliamentary oversight. So parliamentary oversight generally refers to a continuous monitoring or evaluation of the executive actions. Now remember that, as I have already told you, that executive is responsible to whom? Executive is responsible to the Parliament in general and Lok Sabha in particular. Parliament in general and Lok Sabha in particular. So therefore, parliamentary oversight generally means that a continuous monitoring and evaluation of executive actions by the legislature. So thereby, the parliamentary oversight would result in ensuring accountability, transparency, and even the responsiveness in the overall governance process. So that is what is called as parliamentary oversight. So when we have a greater parliamentary oversight, the executive would not function in an arbitrary manner. Majoritarianism will not work. So because of that reason, parliamentary oversight is very, very important, because a parliament is a legislature, and in fact the people who are part of the legislature are directly elected by the people. And why the parliamentary oversight is important, why it actually matters, right? So as I have already told you that we have adopted the parliamentary form of government. We don't have the presidential form of government or the semi-presidential form of government that is seen in France. Rather, we have a parliamentary form of government, and in this parliamentary form of government, the executive is collectively responsible to the legislature. So the Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to the Parliament in general and Lok Sabha in particular. There are various tools, various mechanisms which are available, and those mechanisms also hold the executive accountable. For example, the question hour, 0 hour, and even the parliamentary committees. So all these different tools are available, and these tools ensure a daily and periodic checks on the government. And in fact, what is the constitutional basis of this collective responsibility? So the constitutional basis of collective responsibility is Article 75 of the Indian Constitution. So Article 75 of the Indian Constitution directly says that the Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. So this is what Article 75 of the Indian Constitution says, right? So there are number of means, there are number of ways, mechanisms through which the Parliament can actually hold the executive accountable, such as adjournment, no confidence motion, cut motion, so debates, questions, committee reports, voting. So through all these different devices, the legislature can actually hold the executive accountable. However, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had rightly called the parliamentary democracy as the system of a more responsibility and less stability. So we knew that the presidential form of government is more stable compared to the parliamentary form of government. So presidential form of government is more stable compared to the parliamentary form of government. However, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar rightly held that the parliamentary form of government is a system of government which is having more responsibility but less stability. So thereby it has been emphasizing on daily accountability of the executive to the parliament. So this is what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has been held with respect to the executive accountability to the parliament. However, what are the major challenges which have been undermining the oversight of the parliament, right? So parliamentary oversight is very, very important. However, there are certain challenges which have been undermining the parliamentary oversight. So we have some data. With this data has been proving that there has been undermining oversight of the parliament. Now, the 17th Lok Sabha from 2019 to 24 has witnessed only 60% question hour functionality. So it is just having 60% question hour functionality. That essentially means that in the entire 16th Lok Sabha, imagine that the total questions are asked has to be, the potential is 100 questions, but only 60 questions have been asked, right? So therefore it has witnessed a 40% decline in the functioning of the question hour, and question hour is a tool which holds the executive accountable. This is a legislative tool which holds the executive accountable, and for that matter, Rajya Sabha, so around 52% of the time has been allocated for the question hour, right? So this has been indicating that there is a substantial decline in the functioning of the question hour. And similarly, Parliament is also having issues such as frequent adjournments, protests, disruptions, and all these things have been preventing ministers from being held accountable. We are not able to hold the ministers accountable because the disruptions that are taking place, frequent adjournments, protests. So one such example is that during Pegasus spyware controversy 2021, when the discussion was taking place in the parliament, so there were repeated disruptions, and that has curtailed meaningful questions to the government. So therefore, these disruptions, protests, frequent adjournments have been impacting the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the parliament to hold the executive accountable. Similarly, committees are not utilized efficiently and effectively. So in fact, the parliament is assisted by the number of parliamentary committees. But the problem is that these committees are not working properly because these committees lack the support of the expertise. They don't have the technical knowledge, and because of that reason, the committees are not working properly. And in fact, the number of bills which are being referred to the committees before being actually passed in these houses is also very, very less. And in fact, in recent times, there has been a declining trend. So therefore, the committees are also not performing their duties effectively. And similarly, there is a lack of a post-legislative scrutiny as well. So post-legislative scrutiny is very, very important. So what does it mean? For example, imagine that the parliament has passed a particular law, and after passing this law, after 1 or 2 years, the parliament must review how this law is implemented and what are the actual results of the implementation of this particular law. So that is what is called as the post legislative scrutiny of laws. However, in India, it is absent, right? So there is no structured process which exists to review the effectiveness or compliance of laws post enactment. So one such example is the Companies Amendment Act 2013 has been framed. However, the objective of the Companies Amendment Act 2013 is to simplify the compliance of the companies. However, in recent times, it has been led to an increase in the criminal prosecution, and the failure of the legislative bodies to effectively do the post-legislative scrutiny has been leading to the misuse of the laws which have been passed by the legislature. So these are some challenges that the parliament has been collectively facing, and that has been resulting in the declining parliamentary oversight over the executive. However, what are the reforms that are needed, that are required to strengthen the oversight? So there are certain reforms which are actually required. For example, we need to institutionalize the post-legislative scrutiny. And in fact, countries like UK, so UK has already institutionalized the post-legislative scrutiny. So in this model, the government departments have to submit the law implementation reviews after 3 to 4 years, so that the parliament could review and scrutinize the implementation of those laws in a much more detailed manner. And even a subcommittee under each departmentally related standing committee could periodically review important laws like the insolvency and bankruptcy code law, national education policy. So therefore, when there is a comprehensive scrutiny of laws passed by the parliament, so it will help in correcting the loopholes, correcting the shortcomings which are already existing, and in fact translate reports into the regional languages. So this is also a very important area that the parliament needs to work on. So parliament reports are not actually published in all regional languages, but it is important to translate these reports into the regional languages and produce infographics, short videos to enhance the accessibility. And similarly, we need to mandate the floor discussions on the selected committee reports. So in fact, the committees should have a dedicated technical staff, and they should also have the support of the expertise and analysts also, so that they can do a detailed scrutiny of the bills which are introduced and referred to these parliamentary committees. And technology here can also play a very important role, such as the emerging technologies including the artificial intelligence. And the artificial intelligence technologies can actually help us track the anomalies which are existing in budget allocation, scheme implementation, and the audit trends as well. For example, one such area where we could actually implement the artificial intelligence is that the misutilization of PM Kisan funds. So PM Kisan is a financial incentive program that has been announced by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the year 2019. And in fact, artificial intelligence can be used to understand the misuse, diversion, leakage of funds. Right? Because under the PM Kisan program, what has been happened, many number of ineligible farmers have received benefits. This is because of the data mismatch, and this has been helping the MPs to raise these urgent matters in the parliament, so that the government would also take all necessary and important corrective measures. And this is how these are the reforms that have to be brought in to further strengthen the parliamentary oversight. Right? So parliamentary oversight over the executive. So the next very important article, a topic which is important for both prelims and mains examination, is Vizhinjam port that has been inaugurated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And this Vizhinjam port is located in the Kerala, and it could be considered as the game changer when it comes to the container handling in India. So we'll look into the details of this Vizhinjam port. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi commissioned 8,800 crore Vizhinjam International Deep Water Multi-Purpose Seaport in Kerala's capital. So we'll also look into it where this Vizhinjam port is located. But this is an international deep water multi-purpose seaport, and that is located in Kerala's capital. And in fact, one thing that we should understand, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated this Vizhinjam port in Kerala, so that has resulted in introduction of India, or India became part of the global container transshipment league, because the inauguration of this Vizhinjam International Deep Water Multi-Purpose Seaport with a much more efficiency and effectiveness, so it has included India in a global container transshipment league. So that's significant it is for India. And in fact, so we have already understood that this is 8,800 crore project, and that actually marks the culmination of decades long efforts to establish India's first deep water transshipment port. And in fact, this is also positioned India, right? For example, if you look at the location of this Vizhinjam port, so this is located somewhere in this area, right? So because of that reason, it is also a strategically located area and it will play a very important role when it comes to the logistics, and it could also work as a transshipment hub in the Indian Ocean region. Right, so some details with respect to Vizhinjam port. So this is the location of the Vizhinjam port. This is the Kerala state, and within the Kerala state, so this is the location of Vizhinjam port. Now, so this Vizhinjam port, it has been located near Thiruvananthapuram, capital of Kerala. So it is very close to Thiruvananthapuram, and this Vizhinjam port has been built on the public-private partnership between the Adani Group and Kerala government. So therefore it has been built on the public-private partnership between the Adani Group and also the Kerala government. In fact, the natural draft of this Vizhinjam port is around 20 meter, and it can actually accommodate ultra large container vessels, right? So it substantially increases the ability of the ultra large container vessels coming to this Vizhinjam port. They could actually dock themselves in this port. So therefore it is the key requirement of the global cargo movement. So one thing that we should understand here is that Indo-Pacific has been emerging as the global trade center, right? So it has been emerging as a global trade center, and in future also its importance remains. So therefore in this context, having such a port in a strategically located area is very important for India for the handling of cargo. However, this Vizhinjam port was first conceptualized in the year 1991, way far back, right? So it was conceptualized in 1991, but it saw several delays due to environmental, legal and the logistical issues that they have faced. However, ultimately this port has been inaugurated and it will be made operational in the year 2025, and ultimately it actually marks India as India's maritime infrastructure ambitions, right? So it is a major milestone in India's maritime infrastructure ambitions, and India also entered a League of Nations as well with such a facilities or capabilities. So what are the key features and the strategic importance of this Vizhinjam port? In fact, the port's overall depth and proximity to international shipping lanes, right? Because so this is Indian Ocean, right? So it is very close to the Indian Ocean. So therefore it has a depth of 20 meter, the draft depth of 20 meter. So therefore the port's depth and proximity to international shipping lanes actually makes it ideal for cargo vessels with over 20,000 container capacity. So huge container capacity that this port is actually having, and it is also located in the strategic location. And similarly, so it will have a minimal coastal sand movement. So one thing that we should understand, generally western coast has supported the development of the number of ports. So the reason for this is, so it is a submergent coast. So I hope you knew about this. It is a submergent coast, but on the other hand the eastern coast is the emergent coast. So the eastern coast is emergent coast is because of several rivers that originate in the Western Ghats, and they flow to the Bay of Bengal, and they also carry a lot of sedimentation, and because of that reason the eastern coast is known as emergent coast, and emergent coast don't facilitate the development of the ports. But on the other hand, the western coast is a submerged coast, and it also support the development of the ports as well. So this is one advantage because of the submergent nature of the coast. So there will be a minimal coastal sand movement around the port, and that will ensure a reduced dredging and even reduced maintenance costs for the port as well. And in fact, this Vizhinjam port is significantly reduce India's reliance on the transshipment hubs. So as of now, we have been dependent on transshipment hubs such as Colombo, Singapore and Jebel Ali in United Arab Emirates. So what are these transshipment hubs? So transshipment hubs are actually places, for example, imagine that we have been importing certain essential minerals from Europe. essential minerals from Europe. So what happens is that these essential minerals are diverted to either Singapore or Colombo or Jebel Ali, because we don't have the ports which are actually housing such a large scale containers, right? So however, with the development of this Vizhinjam port, these containers would directly come to the Vizhinjam port, and therefore that would make significantly reduce India's overall dependence on other transshipment hubs such as Colombo, Singapore and Jebel Ali in UAE. So thereby these ports have been currently handling 75% of India's overall transshipped cargo, and in fact India has to pay a huge amount of money for these ports as well. So it actually saves us a lot of money, and in fact this Vizhinjam port can also become an international transshipment hub because it is being developed at the important location. Right, so what is the economic impact and cost savings because of the development of this Vizhinjam port? So according to the government estimates, so India will save approximately 220 million annually every year by managing its own transshipment cargo, right? So around 220 million forex reserves would be saved by India by emerging as the transshipment hub in the region. And in fact, a country actually pays an additional $80 to $100 per container. So this is a huge amount because we are dependent on other ports, Jebel Ali, Singapore and Colombo, and because of that reason we have been paying $80 to $100 more per each container due to reliance on foreign ports. So if we have developed this particular port and if we have made this operational, so we can actually cut these costs, and we could also act as a transshipment hub for other countries as well. And in fact, overall it will improve the logistics efficiency in India, it will reduce the logistic costs, and it will reduce the delivery delays, and it will also strengthen India's overall economic resilience in case of the geopolitical disruptions that took place as well, right? So these are the advantages and benefits of the Vizhinjam port. So anyway, that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. And if you have any doubts regarding all these topics, so please write those doubts in the comment section. We'll try to address all your doubts. So thank you so much.